He was followed by Fanon, who was scheduled to speak on behalf of the FLN. Fanon walked slowly to the rostrum, dressed in a somber, pale-colored suit with a bright white shirt. He wore dark glasses as a shield against the glare of the sun streaming through the windows. He had resolved to use his speech at the AAPC as an opportunity for the very first time in public to make the case for using violence to resist colonialism. This would challenge the commitment to Ghanaian non-violence, which so far had been the hallmark of the conference. Usually, Fanon, keen and ascetic, spoke in a dispassionate and intellectual manner. But on this occasion, he gripped both sides of the lectern and leaned forward towards the audience. However, regrettable the use of violence, he insisted with emotion it had to remain an option. He gave a disturbing account of the atrocities carried out against Algerians by French, arguing that freedom fighters in Africa could not rely on peaceful negotiations alone. Algeria, he stated firmly, was not a part of France. This brought the audience to his feet. It does not mince words, mused Ezekiel Umfalele. What FLN man can afford the luxury? He said, what FNL man can afford the luxury anyway? Algerians have no other recourse but fight back, he says, and FLN means to go through with it. Some of those who did not speak French struggled to follow part of Fanon's speech. The conference had not been able to organize simultaneous translations because of the shortage of funds. So people were interpreting from the platform. Even so, Fanon's speech took the conference by storm. He got the loudest and longest ovation of all the speakers. In effect, noted one delegate, Fanon succeeded in changing the theme of the conference from nonviolent liberation struggle to struggle by any means. In a 2-hour press conference after Fanon's speech, Tom Mboya, in his role as chairman, was interrogated by journalists about his reaction. Mboya replied carefully. He said that the Algerian situation was one of the most important matters to be considered by the conference. There were scenarios, he suggested, in which it was necessary to retaliate. African leaders at this conference are not pledged to any specific policies, he pointed out. They are not pacifists. If you hit them, they might hit back. Fanon's speech had electrified the conference. Then, on the same day, there was another dramatic development of a different kind. Alfred Hutchinson, a leader of the African National Congress of South Africa, suddenly and unexpectedly turned up. He had been one of the 156 accused of high treason by the apartheid state in the infamous treason trial. Nelson Mandela was another. When charges were dropped against Hutchinson, he resolved to leave South Africa immediately without a passport. and to make his way to Ghana. He assumed the identity of a migrant mine worker from Unyasa land, traveling home. After a harrowing journey of 2 months, covering almost 3,000 miles and passing through colonial territories supportive of apartheid, he finally arrived in Accra. The conference delegates were overjoyed. Hutchinson stalked up the aisle, 6 feet of him, recorded Umfalele, just like one of those outlaws on the screen who come to tame and civilize a noisy, lawless town of the wide West. Umfalele, who was on the platform at the time, rushed down to embrace the new arrival beside myself with excitement. The next day, Wednesday, the 10th of December, the Kenyan academic and politician Julius Gikonyo Kiano went up to the rostrum. As he walked, many in attendance lifted banners. Free Kenyatta now. Kiano demanded the immediate release of anti-colonial leader Jomo Kenyatta and the removal from Kenya of Sir Evelyn Baring, the brutal British governor. As Kiano came to the end of his speech, the audience rose to his feet with loud cries of support. In the morning of Thursday, the 11th December, it was the turn of Anthony Enahoro, the leader of the Western Nigerian delegation, to speak. He changed the tone somewhat, the first real sign of a shink in consensus. It would not be realistic, he said, to expect support for a United States of Africa from every African nation. The Liberians also preached caution. Bola hated and Sigurd, noted one journalist. They spoke in a strong American accent. When Patrice Lumumba addressed the conference, he spoke without notes, as was his habit. The fundamental aim of our movement, he declared, is to free the Congolese people from the colonialist regime and hand them their independence. As Nkrumah had done in his speech, Lumumba drew on the United Nations as a moral and global authority. We base our action, he said, on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, rights guaranteed to each and every citizen of humanity by the United Nations Charter. And we are of the opinion that the Congo, as a human society, has the right to join the ranks of free peoples. The current injustice, he urged, and the stupid superiority complex that the colonialists make such a display of are the causes of the drama of the West in Africa. Lumumba expressed his gratitude to the conference for putting him and the other delegates in contact with experienced political figures from all African countries and from all over the world. Above all, said Lumumba, the conference reveals one thing to us, that despite the boundaries separating people in Africa from each other and despite ethnic differences, we have the same awareness, the same soul-plunged day and night in anguish, the same anxious desire to make this African continent a free and happy continent that has rid itself of unrest and fear of any sort of colonialist domination. There was no plenary session on Friday, the 12th of December. Instead, the committees met early in the morning to complete the resolutions. Their work went on until 3 o'clock the next morning, by which time many of the participants were exhausted. But they successfully produced 5 lengthy resolutions ready for consideration by the steering committee, which adopted them unanimously at its final meeting on Saturday morning. The closing assembly began at 11 a.m., bringing all the delegates and observers together for the last time. On the platforms were Mboya, Nkrumah, and other members of the planning committee. Patrice Lumumba was there too, indicating the high degree of respect that he had earned during the conference. Mboya read out the resolutions. One of them tackled neatly the controversy over the use of violence, which had been the focus of debate ever since Fanon's speech. This resolution took a pragmatic approach, declaring its full support to all fighters for freedom in Africa, to all those who resort to peaceful means of non-violence and civil disobedience, as well as to all those who are compelled to retaliate against violence, to attain national independence and freedom for the people. Where such retaliation becomes necessary, the conference condemns all legislations which consider those who fight for their independence and freedom as ordinary criminals. Fanon's victory in Accra had been total. Cameron Dodo assessed years later. He had liberated the minds of all African freedom fighters who had previously entertained qualms about the use of violence to liberate their countries. A key resolution of the conference was to establish a permanent secretariat, which would be based in Accra. Lumumba was one of the delegates elected to the secretariat. Hang on. So, which would endorse the position of the non-alignment and positive neutrality. We are not inclined to the east nor the west, said Mboya to cheers. Africa must be friendly, but always maintaining and safeguarding our independence. It was agreed that all African People's Conference would take place annually, and that the 1959 conference would meet in Tunis. Nkrumah gave the final speech to those who had come from beyond Africa's shores, and especially African Americans from the United States and the Caribbean. He expressed his heartfelt appreciation. We must never forget, he said, that they are part of us. These sons and daughters of Africa were taken away from our shores, and despite all the countries which have separated us, they have not forgotten their ancestral links. Many of them have made no small contribution to the struggle for African freedom. He concluded with his vision of the future. We shall from now on march forward in solid phalanx, united in the spirit of brotherhood and solidarity, so formidable in our strength that all the forces ranged against us shall not prevail. He was thunderously cheered. Then one of the organizers asked the audience to sing Nkosi Sikelele, Sikelele, God bless Africa, and Morena Boloka Sechaba, God bless our country. Pointing to the map of Africa on the wall, he asked them to respond, Mayibuye, bring back Africa. Bring back Africa. The conference ended on a note of euphoria. To young Africans like myself at the time, said Bereket Hapte Selassie, a representative of the Ethiopian National Patriotic Association. It was a moment at once defining and awe-inspiring. Fanon was also elated. He was convinced that almost 60 million Africans would be free by 1960. The African Revolution, observed Nkrumah with solemn satisfaction, had started in earnest. So I'm going to take a tea break because that brings us to the end of the first part of this chart, part 1. We are now going to go to part 2. The part 2 for this reading, the part 2, chapter 1. No, sorry, part 2, chapter 5. We will continue from that in a minute. So let me have a tea break. And tell me what you think. So those of you who have been listening, you tell me what you think so far. The history that you need to know. How America swept into Africa, and then they started their Cold War in Africa in order to undermine what could have been an independent Africa. And Africa was never independent. You know that. So I'm going to go get myself something now. Thank you so much, brethren. So I know normally, we open the line straight up and then we start taking calls, right? I just, do you think we should just leave it at that and I'll let you react? Open the line, let everybody now start reacting to what we have actually shared so far. So we have spent about 90 minutes right now. So we started with Frostos Otobokeyamo. So I want you to please tell me, do you want me to continue for a moment more? Or we should just open the line? Because I know some of you are already calling in. Which one do you like? Tell me. So give me a sec. I'm going to go read the comments so that I can know. Should we continue? Or we can take calls now. React. Okay. So someone said that we should open the line. That's the first one. You want to react. People want to call in. Right. So maybe we should open the line. Take 1 or 2 calls. Right? And then continue. But we have 520-something pages to read. So this can take us like about 3 weeks. So what do you say? Continue for a few more minutes, right? Then take calls. I told you I can be here with you. We can be here for like another 2 hours. I can read chat. So you need more before you can start reacting, Abi. Great. Now let us continue then. So keep the line right here off. There's no point calling in then, okay? Let us continue. So this time around, we are continuing from part 2 the CIA. And that will now be chapter 5. Infiltration into Africa. The absence of a goodwill communique from America to the All-African People's Conference in Accra had been noted with regret by the delegates. Then, just before the final session, a message arrived from Vice President Nixon. He had been advised of the bad impression created by America's silence and was seeking to put this right. Even so, one of the American delegates described the telegram as a lukewarm statement, quite out of keeping with the spirit of the conference. In any case, his telegram arrived too late. The hard-working committee or committees did not have time to read it out. However, the US had in fact been well represented throughout the conference in covert and unforeseen ways. Nearly 40 Americans went to Accra in December 1958. African Americans and white Americans in fairly equal numbers. Some of them attended as individuals in their own right, such as the civil rights activist, Congressman Charles Diggs Jr. of Detroit. Others represented non-governmental organizations, NGOs, such as the African American Institute, the American Society of African Culture, the Harlem-based United African Nationalist Movement, the Quaker organization known as the American Friends Service Committee, the American Committee on Africa, the American Federation of Labor and Congress of Industrial Organizations, and the Associated Negro Press. Although they all shared an interest in Africa, they came from varied backgrounds and had different political points of views. Many of those who were Nkrumah's personal friends had a history of involvement in the Council on African Affairs, which had been created in 1937 in the United States as a way of supporting the struggle against colonialism and racism in Africa. Its headquarters were in Harlem, in New York City. The first executive director was Max Yergan, an American intellectual who had been among the first Black YMCA missionaries in South Africa. Horrified by the racism of South Africa, he had eschewed the more mainstream civil rights organizations in favor of communism. In the council, he worked closely with Paul Robeson. Other members included Eslander Robertson, Webb Du Bois, Charlie Graham, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., Ralph Bunche, and William Alpheus Hunting Jr., a former professor at Howard University. The council published the monthly bulletin New Africa, which shone a spotlight on injustices in Africa, with articles by scholars, including Du Bois and Hunting. The council created a successful public profile and organized mass meetings, including rallies attended by tens of thousands in Madison Square Garden, I thought as much, and at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem. Nkrumah participated in a conference in 1944, organized by the council to project an international program for the post-war liberation of Africa. Yergan was ousted as executive director in 1948. He had become openly anti-communist, and from 1952 started to collaborate with the FBI against the council. By then, the council had become a casualty of the Cold War. The House Un-American Activities Committee, HUAC, accused members of the council of being communists and pointed to the fact that some, like Paul Robeson, had visited the Soviet Union in Soviet Union. In 1954, Executive Director Hunting was subpoenaed to appear before a grand jury and was forced to surrender all the council's documents relating to their communications with African National Congress of South Africa. The council, effectively crippled by the investigation of HUAC, was dissolved in 1955. Meanwhile, Hunting served 6 months in prison for refusing to reveal the names of the contributors to the Civil Rights Bail Fund. In May 1952, Yergan was named as a communist by a former staffer of the National Negro Congress and called to appear before the House Un-American Activities Committee. There, he disowned his earlier political convictions, vigorously denying any willing